It began with a single question. What lies beyond what we can see? The universe, vast and infinite as it seems, has a boundary. A limit defined not by walls, but by the speed of light and time itself. Everything beyond that boundary remains hidden, unreachable, unknowable. And yet human curiosity has always thrived on the unreachable. In 2035, fueled by advancements in propulsion technology and a deep hunger for answers, a team of international scientists launched a probe into the void. They called it Event Horizon, a name chosen as a tribute to the threshold between the known and the unknown. Its mission was deceptively simple: to venture farther than any human-made object had ever gone, past the edge of the observable universe, and report back on what it found. For the first few years, the probe sent back standard data: temperature readings, particle compositions, cosmic background radiation levels. It was fascinating, but expected. Then, as it approached what scientists theorized to be the edge, the data began to shift. Patterns emerged in the radiation, subtle at first, like whispers in static. The farther it traveled, the clearer these patterns became, as if the universe itself was speaking in a language we didn't yet understand. Scientists were ecstatic, convinced they were on the brink of a groundbreaking discovery. Some believed these patterns could be the remnants of the Big Bang echoing back at us. Others speculated they might hold clues to the nature of dark matter. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the transmission stopped. No fading signal, no gradual loss, just silence. The probe had traveled so far that even light, the fastest thing in the universe, could no longer carry its messages back to us. Or at least, that was the official explanation. Behind closed doors, there were whispers of something else. Engineers reviewing the final transmissions claimed the probe hadn't gone silent because it was out of range. The data logs hinted at interference. Something had actively disrupted the signal. But what? And why? Officially, the mission was declared a success. The probe had gone farther than anything in human history, even if its ultimate fate was unknown. The world moved on, celebrating the achievement before turning its attention to the next big thing. But in the years that followed, a quiet unease settled over those who had worked on the project. Some reported vivid nightmares of endless voids and incomprehensible shapes. Others became obsessed with decoding the last few data packets, convinced there was a hidden message in the noise. One researcher even claimed to have found a pattern resembling a heartbeat in the final transmission, though this was dismissed as a coincidence. For 20 years, the Event Horizon was little more than a footnote in the annals of space exploration. Then, one unremarkable day, a small object appeared on long-range radar. It was moving slowly, almost deliberately, as if it wanted to be found. When it came close enough for visual confirmation, disbelief turned to shock. The object was the Event Horizon. Against all odds, it had returned. The news of Event Horizon's return spread like wildfire, first among the scientific community, then across the globe. A probe designed to be a one-way mission, its trajectory aimed into the infinite unknown, had somehow come back. This alone was impossible. The probe had no propulsion system capable of reversing its course, no fuel reserves to make the journey home, and no programming to guide it back. Yet here it was, entering Earth's orbit as if it had always intended to return. The space agency scrambled to assemble a recovery team, but beneath the excitement was an undeniable undercurrent of fear. If the impossible had happened, what did it mean? The retrieval itself was a logistical masterpiece. A specialized shuttle was dispatched to intercept the probe, its crew trained for what should have been a straightforward operation. But as the shuttle approached the Event Horizon, the team reported a series of anomalies. Instruments malfunctioned, clocks ran erratically, speeding up or slowing down without explanation. Even the shuttle's onboard AI, a state-of-the-art system designed to anticipate and correct errors, began displaying glitches, unprompted diagnostics, nonsensical error codes, and, in one chilling instance, a message on the main display that simply read, "We are here." When the probe was finally secured and brought aboard, it appeared pristine. Too pristine. In the decades since its launch, it should have been scarred by micrometeoroid impacts and coated in layers of cosmic dust. Instead, it looked untouched, as though it had been manufactured yesterday. The team performed an initial inspection, finding no structural damage and no signs of tampering. But as they opened the probe to access its data logs, the atmosphere aboard the shuttle shifted. The crew later described an unshakable sense of being watched, though their cameras and sensors detected nothing. Inside the probe, the onboard storage systems were intact, their blinking lights confirming they still held data. But nestled among the machinery was something no one could explain, a small, metallic object affixed to the inner wall. It was roughly the size of a human hand, its surface smooth and reflective, yet the material didn't match any known element. More disturbing were the markings etched into it, not alien symbols or cryptic patterns, but plain English words. Stop. Back on Earth, the probe and its strange cargo were transported to a secure facility for further analysis. The data logs were extracted, and what they revealed left scientists reeling. For the first half of its journey, the event horizon had functioned as expected, transmitting data consistent with what was known about the universe. But as it neared the theoretical edge of the observable universe, everything changed. The radiation patterns it recorded became increasingly erratic, resembling pulses rather than random noise. The probe's temperature sensors detected extreme fluctuations, as though it had passed through pockets of space that were alternately freezing and searing. And then the interference began. At first, it was subtle, minor glitches in the data, timestamps that didn't align. But the anomalies grew more pronounced with each transmission. By the time the final signal was sent, the data was incomprehensible. Bursts of static interspersed with what appeared to be rhythmic patterns, like a pulse or a heartbeat. It was this final transmission that had haunted some of the original researchers, though they dismissed it at the time as an artifact of the probe's malfunctioning systems. Now, with the probe back in their hands, those same researchers couldn't shake the feeling that they'd missed something. The metallic object only deepened the mystery. Attempts to analyze it were met with frustration. Scans revealed no internal structure, no seams or joints, no signs of wear. Its composition defied every test, from spectroscopy to electron microscopy. And yet, when one researcher brushed their hand against its surface, the object emitted a faint hum, like the distant vibration of a tuning fork. The same researcher reported vivid dreams for days afterward, dreams of an endless void filled with shifting shapes, accompanied by a low, droning sound. The writing on the object, simple as it was, posed the most unsettling question: who or what had put it there? The event horizon was a closed system, designed to operate autonomously. No human had touched it since its launch, and there was no evidence of contamination or tampering. But the word etched into the object, "stop," was undeniable. Someone or something had intercepted the probe, altered it, and sent it back. Speculation ran rampant. Some theorized that the probe had encountered an advanced alien civilization, one capable of manipulating matter at an unimaginable scale. Others suggested the probe had crossed into another dimension, where the rules of physics as we understood them no longer applied. A few, more grounded in their skepticism, argued that the object and its message were elaborate hoaxes planted by a rogue nation or private entity. But none of these explanations accounted for the sheer impossibility of the probe's return journey. As the days turned into weeks, the mood among the researchers shifted from curiosity to unease. Strange incidents began to plague the facility. Computers crashed inexplicably. Security cameras recorded brief but unexplainable distortions, as though the air itself was rippling. Several staff members reported hearing faint whispers when alone, though the recordings from their devices picked up nothing. And always in the background was the object, sitting on its pedestal, silent and inscrutable, its warning etched into its surface. Stop! The decision to dig deeper into the Event Horizon's data logs was not taken lightly. By now, the facility was operating under heightened security, with limited access granted only to the most senior researchers. Every precaution was taken, firewalls strengthened, communication lines monitored, but no measure could shake the growing unease. The probe was not just a machine. It had become a puzzle that defied every known rule of science, and its answers felt more like warnings. The recovered logs were vast, containing terabytes of data spanning decades. At first glance, much of it seemed routine: particle measurements, thermal fluctuations, gravitational anomalies. But as the logs approached the moment when the probe had crossed the supposed edge of the universe, the data took a sharp turn into the inexplicable. Distortions appeared not just in the measurements, but in the timestamps themselves. Hours compressed into seconds, and then stretched into days. The probe seemed to have entered a realm where time no longer behaved as it should. More disturbing were the visual records. While the Event Horizon was not equipped with conventional cameras, it carried instruments capable of mapping radiation patterns and converting them into visual formats. These images, once processed, revealed something that no one could explain. Shapes. At first, they appeared as faint ripples, like disturbances in a still pond. But as the probe continued its journey, the shapes grew more defined. Geometric structures, impossibly large and impossibly complex, stretching across the cosmic void. They were not natural formations. They were precise, deliberate, as though carved into the fabric of space itself. The team couldn't agree on what the images represented. Some argued they were evidence of an advanced civilization, structures built on a scale beyond human comprehension. Others believed they were artifacts of a reality breaking down, the visual representation of a universe unraveling at its edges. But there was another theory, one spoken in hushed tones and dismissed as paranoia, that these shapes were alive. It wasn't just the images that suggested this. Embedded in the radiation patterns, researchers began to find sequences that resembled code, structured, repeating sequences that hinted at intelligence. Attempts to decode them yielded incomplete results, fragments of patterns that seemed to defy logic. One sequence, however, stood out. It repeated across multiple transmissions, growing more frequent as the probe neared the edge. When translated into binary and analyzed, it spelled out a single word: leave. The implications were staggering. If the patterns were a form of communication, it meant that something or someone was aware of the probe's presence and wanted it gone. But why? Was the probe intruding on forbidden territory, or had it simply stumbled into a place it was never meant to be? As these questions loomed, the facility itself seemed to react. The strange occurrences escalated. Researchers reported feeling disoriented, as though the air itself was heavier. Equipment malfunctioned without cause. One technician claimed to see a shadow move across the wall of a sealed lab, though no one else was present. And then there were the dreams. Nearly everyone who worked in proximity to the probe began experiencing vivid, often terrifying dreams. They described vast, empty spaces filled with shifting structures, accompanied by a low, resonant hum. Some said they felt watched, as though unseen eyes were studying them from the darkness. Others woke up screaming, unable to recall what had terrified them, but certain it was connected to the probe. Then a breakthrough, or what seemed like one. A linguistics expert was brought in to analyze the markings on the metallic object. They noted that while the word "stop" was in English, the style of the engraving suggested a tool not made by human hands. The edges were too clean, the depth too consistent, as though the letters had been burned into the metal by an impossibly precise laser. But more interesting was the positioning of the word. When viewed under certain lighting, the letters cast a faint shadow onto the surface of the object, forming a pattern that resembled a map. The map was unlike anything seen before. It didn't align with Earth's geography, the solar system, or even the galaxy, but when overlaid with the probe's final trajectory, it revealed a chilling detail. The shapes detected in the radiation patterns matched the locations marked on the map. Whatever the probe had encountered, it wasn't random. It was coordinated, intentional. But why send the probe back? If the beings or forces beyond the edge of the universe wanted it gone, why not destroy it? What purpose did the warning serve? As these questions mounted, an unsettling possibility began to take shape. The probe wasn't just a messenger, it was a beacon. The idea that the probe might be a beacon sent a ripple of dread through the team. A beacon implied a signal, a call to action, something designed to draw attention. But attention from what? And for what purpose? These questions loomed heavily as the team continued their analysis, now working under a strict veil of secrecy. Even governments, initially eager for updates, were being kept at arm's length. The scientists couldn't risk the information leaking before they understood the full scope of what they were dealing with. The map etched onto the metallic object became the focus of their investigation. While it didn't correspond to any known star systems, it seemed to depict points of interest, specific locations that aligned with the probe's radiation data. The closer they studied these points, the clearer it became that the shapes detected by the probe weren't random anomalies. They formed a network, a lattice stretching across the fabric of space itself. The patterns were too deliberate, too interconnected, to be dismissed as natural phenomena. The idea that the probe had crossed into a constructed part of the universe wasn't just unsettling, it was paradigm-shifting. What kind of civilization could alter the structure of space on such a scale? And if they had the power to do so, why would they care about a single insignificant probe? As these questions churned in the minds of the researchers, the facility itself seemed to grow darker, heavier, as though the very air carried the weight of their discovery. Then the voices started. At first, it was subtle. A researcher alone in the observation room swore they heard faint murmurs just beyond the range of comprehension. Another described hearing their name whispered when no one else was in the building. These incidents were brushed off as stress, the natural result of long hours and mounting pressure. But as the voices became more frequent, they were harder to ignore. They weren't audible in the traditional sense. Recording devices captured nothing. But everyone who heard them described the same thing. A low, urgent tone, like a warning. The team's leader, Dr. Miriam Cole, tried to maintain order, insisting on rational explanations. But even she couldn't deny the growing list of anomalies. One night, as she reviewed the latest findings alone in her office, she felt an intense pressure in her ears, like the sensation of descending too quickly in an airplane. Her computer screen flickered, and for a brief moment, the word "Go" appeared in large, bold letters before the system shut down entirely. When the IT team examined the logs, they found no trace of the event. Dr. Cole didn't report the incident, but it left her shaken. Meanwhile, the probe's data continued to yield bizarre insights. One discovery sent shockwaves through the team. Embedded within the noise of the final transmission was a faint, rhythmic signal. When isolated and amplified, it sounded eerily like a heartbeat. The implications were horrifying. Was the probe itself alive in some way? Or had it brought something back, something that now existed within the data? Theories ranged from the plausible to the outlandish, but no one could shake the feeling that they were dealing with something fundamentally beyond human understanding. The metallic object added another layer of complexity. Despite every attempt to analyze it, the material defied all forms of testing. When exposed to high temperatures, it remained cool to the touch. When struck with force, it produced no sound. But the most disturbing discovery came when a researcher accidentally dropped a pen near the object. The pen didn't bounce or roll, it simply stopped mid-air, suspended as if caught in an invisible field. It hung there for a moment before falling to the ground with an unnatural slowness. The room was silent as everyone stared, their unease deepening. As these phenomena piled up, the team began to wonder if they were dealing with something more than just a warning. The probe's return, the metallic object, the strange behaviors, it all pointed to a single conclusion. Something had followed the probe back. The idea was absurd, yet it was the only explanation that fit the evidence. And if it was true, then whatever had come back wasn't just observing them, it was interacting with them. The facility became a pressure cooker of fear and suspicion. Researchers began avoiding certain rooms, claiming they felt wrong. The security team reported seeing flickering lights and unexplained shadows on the monitors. One guard quit on the spot after swearing he saw a figure standing next to the probe, only for it to vanish the moment he blinked. Tensions were running high, and the once tight-knit team was starting to fracture. Dr. Cole convened an emergency meeting to address the growing paranoia. But as she spoke, laying out a plan to double down on security and continue their work, the lights in the conference room flickered. For a brief moment, every screen in the room lit up with the same image, the word "enough," displayed in stark white letters on a black background. The room fell silent. Then the power cut out entirely. When it came back, the metallic object was gone. Panic set in almost immediately after the metallic object vanished. Alarms blared throughout the facility, red lights flashing as security protocols activated. Researchers and staff scrambled, their faces a mix of fear and confusion. Dr. Cole stood in the conference room, her mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. The object had been under constant surveillance. There was no conceivable way it could have been physically removed without someone noticing. Yet it was gone, and with it, any illusion of control they thought they had. Security teams scoured every inch of the building, but the object was nowhere to be found. More unsettling were the reports coming in from various departments. In the minutes following the blackout, equipment all over the facility began malfunctioning. Lab instruments spewed out nonsensical readings. Computers displayed strings of code that seemed to loop endlessly, defying all attempts to shut them down. Even the building's environmental controls went haywire, with temperatures fluctuating wildly from one room to the next. As chaos unfolded, Dr. Cole gathered her core team in a secure room deep within the facility. The air was thick with tension. She looked around at the faces of her colleagues, people she'd worked with for years, now drawn and haunted. "We need to face the possibility that we're dealing with something beyond our understanding," she said quietly. "This isn't just a scientific anomaly anymore. It's affecting our reality." One of the researchers, a physicist named Alan, spoke up. "If the probe brought something back, something not bound by our physical laws, it could be manipulating the space around us. The glitches, the voices, objects disappearing. It's all consistent with disruptions in space-time." "Are you suggesting this entity can control our environment?" another team member asked, skepticism tinged with fear. I'm saying we can't rule it out, Alan replied. We sent the probe out to explore the unknown, and now the unknown is here. Dr. Cole considered this. We need to contain whatever this is, she said. But first we have to understand its intentions. The messages, the words stop, leave, enough. They suggest it's been trying to warn us. Warn us or threaten us, someone muttered. At that moment, the lights flickered again. The room fell silent as a low hum permeated the air, growing louder until it resonated within their very bones. The hum then transformed into a series of rhythmic pulses, eerily similar to the heartbeat-like signal found in the probe's data. The sound was both external and internal, as if echoing inside their minds. Without warning, the large monitor on the wall lit up, displaying a live feed from one of the facility's security cameras. The image showed the main laboratory, where the probe was kept. Standing next to the probe was a shadowy figure, indistinct and wavering, like a silhouette cast by flickering flames. The figure raised an arm, pointing directly at the camera, or perhaps at those watching behind it. Fear paralyzed the room. Dr. Cole forced herself to speak. "Is that a live feed?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," confirmed the technician, his hands trembling over the keyboard. "But there's no one scheduled to be in that area." "Can we enhance the image?" she asked. "I'm trying," he replied, typing commands frantically. The image zoomed in, but the figure remained blurry, its features impossible to discern. Then, slowly, words began to appear on the screen, overlaying the video. One by one, letters formed until a message was spelled out. "You were warned." The screen went black. Simultaneously, every electronic device in the facility shut down. The hum ceased, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the room in a dim red glow. The team looked at each other, the gravity of their situation sinking in deeper than ever. Dr. Cole made a decision. "We need to evacuate," she said firmly. "Whatever this is, it's escalating. We can't handle it here." As the team moved to leave, the ground beneath them shuddered. It wasn't an earthquake, more like a deep vibration emanating from the Earth's core. The tremor passed quickly, but it was enough to unsettle everyone further. Making their way through the facility's corridors, they found the hallways eerily empty. The usual hum of machinery and distant chatter of personnel were absent. It was as if the building itself was holding its breath. Reaching the main exit, they were met with a sight that stopped them cold. The doors were sealed shut, massive steel barriers locked into place as part of the facility's containment protocols. Manual overrides failed to release them. Communications were down, cell phones had no signal, and landlines were dead. "We're trapped," Alan said grimly. "There's got to be a way out," Dr. Cole insisted. "Emergency exits, ventilation shafts, something." Splitting into smaller groups, they searched for alternative routes. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the strange phenomena intensified. Walls seemed to stretch unnaturally. Corridors that should have led to familiar areas looped back on themselves, and rooms appeared where none existed before. It was as if the facility was being rewritten around them. One group found themselves back at the main laboratory despite walking in a straight line away from it. The probe stood in the center of the room, exactly as it had before, except now the metallic object was hovering above it, rotating slowly. The sight was mesmerizing and terrifying all at once. The object emitted a soft glow, casting shifting shadows that danced along the walls. Driven by a mix of curiosity and desperation, one researcher stepped forward. "Maybe we can communicate," she said. "Maybe it wants to tell us something." "Don't," another warned. "We don't know what we're dealing with." But it was too late. She reached out tentatively, her fingers grazing the object's surface. Immediately, her eyes widened, and she gasped, not in pain, but in revelation. "I can see it," she whispered. "I understand." "Understand what?" Dr. Cole asked, approaching cautiously. "It's not here to harm us," the researcher continued, her voice distant. "It's protecting something, protecting us." "From what?" Alan pressed. "From ourselves," she replied, turning to face them. Her expression was serene, yet her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before. "We've pushed too far, reached into places we weren't meant to go. The edges of the universe aren't just boundaries of distance, they're boundaries of reality. Beyond them lies something else." Before anyone could respond, the facility's alarms blared back to life, but the sounds were distorted, almost agonized. The walls began to vibrate, and the lights flickered erratically. The metallic object rose higher, its glow intensifying. "We have to stop this!" Dr. Cole shouted over the cacophony. "How do we make it end?" The researcher looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "We have to let go. Destroy the probe. It's the link." "Destroy it? After everything?" Alan exclaimed. "It's the only way," she insisted. "We brought back a conduit, a bridge that's allowing our realities to merge. If we don't sever the connection, neither will survive intact." Desperation overcame hesitation. Dr. Cole nodded. "Do it." They scrambled to initiate the facility's self-destruct sequence for the laboratory, a last resort measure designed to contain hazardous materials. With systems malfunctioning, it was a race against time and failing technology. As they worked, the environment around them continued to deteriorate. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and whispers filled the air, overlapping into an incomprehensible chorus. Finally, the sequence was set. They had 60 seconds to reach minimum safe distance, a feat that was physically impossible. Accepting their fate, they huddled together in the corridor outside the lab. The researcher who had touched the object spoke softly. Maybe this is what was meant to happen, a warning, heeded too late. The explosion was both silent and deafening. A flash of light engulfed the laboratory, and for a moment everything was illuminated in stark clarity. Then darkness swallowed them. When the light faded, silence filled the void. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Dr. Cole opened her eyes, expecting oblivion, but instead she was met with darkness, not the oppressive, heavy kind that had suffused the facility, but a vast, quiet emptiness. She was still alive. Around her, the remaining members of her team were stirring, coughing, and disoriented, but otherwise unharmed. The corridor they'd been in moments ago was gone, replaced by a featureless expanse that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. "What just happened?" Alan asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Dr. Cole didn't respond. She was staring at the horizon, or what passed for a horizon in this place. Shapes loomed in the distance, impossibly large and shifting constantly, like massive shadows cast by something unseen. The air here felt strange, not heavy but dense, as though every breath was being filtered through a medium that wasn't entirely physical. They weren't in the facility anymore. That much was clear. Whether they'd been transported, consumed, or simply erased and rewritten, none of them could say. The only thing they knew was that this place wasn't Earth. It wasn't even reality as they understood it. They had crossed into something else. The researcher who had touched the metallic object was the first to speak. "This is where it begins," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Where what begins?" Dr. Cole asked, forcing herself to remain composed despite the overwhelming strangeness of their surroundings. "The other side," she replied, looking at the shapes in the distance. "This is where the boundaries break down. The probe didn't just cross into a different part of the universe, it crossed into somewhere we were never meant to go." The words hung heavy in the air. The team exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. Alan stepped forward, his face pale but resolute. "We need to move," he said. "Standing here won't help us figure out how to get back." But moving wasn't so simple. The ground beneath their feet felt unstable, shifting subtly with every step, like walking on the surface of a calm yet restless ocean. Worse, the shapes in the distance seemed to react to their presence, growing larger or closer, or perhaps both. The closer they looked, the harder it was to discern their true form. One moment they appeared angular, like enormous geometric constructs. The next they seemed fluid, flowing and morphing like liquid caught in zero gravity. "We're being watched," one of the team members whispered, their voice trembling. "I can feel it." Dr. Cole didn't dismiss the comment. She felt it too. There was an undeniable sense of observation, as though they were under constant scrutiny by something vast and incomprehensible. The whispers began again, faint and disjointed, but this time they weren't just voices. They were thoughts, ideas pressing into their minds like foreign invaders. Some were unintelligible, mere fragments of alien logic. Others were clearer, though no less unsettling. "You should not be here. You were warned. Leave." The last word resonated deeply, carrying a force that made several of them stagger. Dr. Cole pressed her hands to her temples, trying to block out the invasive presence. "We're intruding," she said through gritted teeth. "This place, it doesn't want us here." "But there's no way back," Alan said, his frustration boiling over. "The lab's gone, the probe's destroyed, and we're stuck in whatever this is." The researcher who had touched the object stepped forward again, her expression unreadable. "The probe was never the way back," she said. "It was the key to opening the door, but now that we're here, there's only one way to close it." "And what's that?" Dr. Cole demanded. The researcher turned to face the towering shapes, her gaze steady. "We have to let them decide." Before anyone could stop her, she started walking toward the shapes. The air around her seemed to ripple as she approached, the shadows bending and warping unnaturally. Dr. Cole called after her, but the woman didn't stop. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic cacophony, yet the researcher moved with purpose, her figure growing smaller as she neared the towering forms. Then, abruptly, the shapes stopped shifting. They solidified into something more distinct, massive, incomprehensible figures that defied logic. They had no faces, no recognizable features, yet their presence was overwhelming, as though the universe itself had condensed into these entities. The researcher stopped a few feet away from them, her head tilted upward. For a moment, the whispers ceased. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, the shapes began to collapse inward, folding into themselves like black holes, consuming matter. The light in the space dimmed, and the air grew heavier, pressing down on the team until it felt like they might be crushed. Dr. Cole fell to her knees, gasping for breath, as the last of the shapes disappeared into the void. When the pressure lifted, the team found themselves back in the facility. The lab was gone, reduced to rubble, but the rest of the building was intact. Emergency lights flickered overhead, casting a dim glow over the wreckage. Dr. Cole looked around, counting her team. The researcher who had walked toward the shapes was gone. "What just happened?" Alan asked, his voice barely audible. Dr. Cole shook her head. She didn't have an answer. All she knew was that they had been spared, or perhaps simply sent back, with a message they couldn't ignore. The probe was gone, the object destroyed, but the implications of what they had unleashed lingered. They had touched the edge of reality and been shown the price of curiosity. Whatever existed beyond the observable universe, it wasn't waiting to be explored. It was waiting to be left alone. The facility was eerily quiet in the aftermath. The researchers stumbled out of the ruined lab, their faces pale and drawn, eyes darting at every shadow, as though expecting the shapes to reappear. Dr. Cole led them down the main corridor, her mind racing as she tried to process what had just happened. They had been somewhere else, somewhere outside the boundaries of reality, and now they were back. But why? And what had the researcher meant by letting them decide? The remaining team members convened in the control room where emergency power had restored partial functionality to the building systems. Alan sat in front of the main console, running diagnostics with trembling hands. "Most of the data is gone," he muttered. "The logs, the telemetry. It's like it was erased." Dr. Cole rubbed her temples, exhaustion overtaking her. "Erased by what?" "Not what," Alan replied, his voice unsteady. "Who? It's like someone didn't want us keeping records." A heavy silence settled over the group. They all knew what he meant. The entities, the shapes, the voices, had made their presence known in a way that left no room for doubt. They weren't just watching. They were controlling. As the team tried to piece together what little information remained, strange anomalies began to appear in the facility. A low hum resonated through the walls, growing louder in intervals before fading to nothing. Screens flickered sporadically, displaying brief flashes of distorted images, geometric patterns, shifting landscapes, and what looked like fragments of the shapes they had encountered. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that seemed to seep into their bones. Then came the writing. It started on the walls of the control room, words scrawled in a dark, oily substance that hadn't been there moments before. "Leave!" The team stared in horror as the letters seemed to spread, forming new phrases. "You were warned. This is not yours." The messages were not random. They were deliberate, precise, as though the entities were still speaking to them, even from beyond the veil. "Why didn't they just kill us?" one of the team members asked, their voice trembling. "If they wanted us gone, why send us back at all?" Dr. Cole didn't have an answer, but deep down she knew the entities weren't acting out of mercy. They had a purpose, one that went beyond anything the team could comprehend. Alan continued to dig through what remained of the probe's data, his eyes bloodshot and weary. "There's one file still intact," he said. "It's buried deep, like it wasn't meant to be found." "Play it," Dr. Cole said, though her gut told her she wouldn't like what she was about to hear. Alan hesitated before pressing a key. The audio file crackled to life, filled with static and faint pulses like a distant heartbeat. Then came a voice, distorted, inhuman, yet unmistakably deliberate. The words were slow, measured, as though spoken by something that didn't fully understand the concept of language. "Your curiosity will destroy you." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving the room in silence. The team sat frozen, the weight of the message pressing down on them like a physical force. "What does it mean?" Alan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a warning," Dr. Cole said, her tone grim. "Whatever we've been doing, sending probes, pushing boundaries, they see it as a threat, and now they're telling us to stop." "But what if we don't?" someone asked. "What happens if we keep going?" Before Dr. Cole could respond, the facility was plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered briefly before going out entirely, leaving them in pitch black. The hum returned, louder and more insistent, vibrating through the walls like a living thing. Then, in the darkness, came the whispers. They were everywhere, overlapping and incomprehensible, yet each voice seemed directed at them. The words didn't need translation. They felt more like thoughts imposed on their minds. The whispers grew louder, converging into a single resonant phrase that echoed in the emptiness. "This is your final warning." The hum stopped abruptly, and the lights flickered back on. The writing on the walls was gone, as though it had never been there. But the tension in the air remained, a silent reminder of the power they had encountered. Dr. Cole, stood slowly, her legs weak beneath her. "We have to report this," she said. "Not just to the agency. This goes beyond science. The world needs to know." "And what good will that do?" Alan asked, his tone bitter. "They'll ignore it, or worse, they'll send another probe, and this will all happen again." Dr. Cole didn't respond. She knew he was right. Humanity's curiosity had always been its greatest strength, and its greatest flaw. Even with everything they had seen, everything they had endured, there would always be someone willing to take the risk, to push the boundaries a little further. The team left the control room in silence, each of them grappling with the enormity of what they had experienced. The facility was empty now, eerily quiet, as though the building itself had been abandoned by whatever presence had lingered there. As they stepped outside, the cold night air hit them like a slap, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere inside. Above them, the stars shone brightly, indifferent to the horrors they had faced. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the observable universe, the entities were waiting, watching, their warnings unheeded. The days that followed were marked by an uneasy silence. The team, now scattered and under strict orders to remain isolated, tried to resume some semblance of normalcy. But normal was impossible. Each of them had glimpsed something beyond comprehension, and the weight of it clung to them like a shadow. Dr. Cole, unable to sleep, spent her nights staring at the stars through her window, replaying the events in her mind. The whispers, the shapes, the final warning. They were etched into her memory, a reminder that humanity had ventured too far into the unknown. Despite the team's efforts to report their findings, the response from those in power was predictable. The data they managed to recover was deemed inconclusive, and the official explanation for the events at the facility was a catastrophic systems failure. The probe's destruction was labeled a necessary containment measure, and the anomalies were dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. Even the few recordings that survived were dismissed as data corruption. The world moved on, oblivious to the truth, and the team was left to carry the burden alone. But the anomalies didn't stop. Alan was the first to notice. Back at his home, miles away from the facility, he began to experience strange phenomena. Lights flickered unpredictably, shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, and at night he heard faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. At first he thought he was losing his mind, a victim of the psychological toll of the mission. But when his phone, sitting on his desk, lit up without warning to display a single word, "watching," he knew it wasn't over. Others reported similar experiences. One team member woke to find strange geometric patterns scrawled on their bedroom walls, identical to the ones the probe had transmitted. Another found their reflection in the mirror staring back at them with an expression they weren't making. Dr. Cole received a package with no return address. Inside was a single piece of metal, identical to the object they had recovered from the probe. Etched onto its surface was a new message: "You will not be warned again." The realization hit them all at once. The entities hadn't severed the connection. Destroying the probe hadn't been enough. By reaching into their domain, humanity had opened a door that couldn't be fully closed, and now whatever lay beyond that door was beginning to seep through. Dr. Cole called an emergency meeting, this time in secret. The surviving members of the team gathered in a nondescript building far from any prying eyes. They shared their experiences, each one more unsettling than the last. Alan brought his phone, which now refused to display anything except the word "soon" on its screen. Another member showed photographs of their home, where objects seemed to have rearranged themselves into strange, symmetrical patterns while they slept. "We can't ignore this," Dr. Cole said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "This isn't just about us. If these entities are trying to push into our reality, The consequences could be catastrophic. "But what can we do?" one of the researchers asked. "We don't even understand what they are, let alone how to stop them." Dr. Cole didn't have an answer. The truth was, there might not be a way to stop what was happening, but she knew they couldn't give up. They had been chosen, marked perhaps, to bear the burden of knowledge. If they couldn't prevent what was coming, they could at least prepare for it. Over the following weeks, the team worked in secret, compiling everything they knew into a single encrypted document. It was a desperate attempt to leave a record for the future, a warning for whoever might come after them. The document detailed the probe's mission, the entities they had encountered, and the messages they had received. At the end, Dr. Cole added a final note. "To whoever finds this, we thought we could explore the unknown. We thought curiosity was our greatest strength. But some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. If you're reading this, it means they're still watching. Don't make the same mistake we did. Don't look for them. Don't call out. And whatever you do, don't answer." The document was sent to multiple hidden locations, each one chosen for its isolation and security. The team hoped that at least one copy would survive the coming storm. Then they went their separate ways, each of them retreating into anonymity, haunted by the knowledge that their actions had set something in motion. For a time, the whispers quieted, the shadows receded, and the anomalies lessened. It seemed as though the entities had retreated, content to watch from a distance. But Dr. Cole knew better. The quiet wasn't peace, it was patience. They were still out there, waiting beyond the edge of the universe, their warnings unheeded. And one day, when humanity's curiosity drove it too far once again, they would return. Late one night, as Dr. Cole sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, she noticed her reflection in the window. At first, it seemed normal, a tired woman staring back at herself. But as she looked closer, the reflection began to change. The face in the glass was no longer hers. It was watching her, and it was smiling.